What happens to a nation that legalizes homosexual marriage and turns from the biblical command on this issue? Let's take a closer look, particularly at Canada, who legalized homosexual marriage on July 20th, 2005. The question one must ask, is the legalization of homosexual marriage really about promoting equality to all citizens, or does it just give certain privileges while ripping basic God-given rights away from the majority? Just recently in 2012, the government in Alberta, Canada, told families that under Alberta's new Education Act, homeschoolers and faith-based schools will not be permitted to teach that homosexual acts are sinful as part of their academic program. In other words, set yourself at war with God. Whatever the nature of schooling, homeschooling, private school, Catholic school, we do not tolerate disrespect for differences, said Donna McCall, who is the Assistant Director of Communication for Education Minister Thomas Lukasuk. Paul Ferris of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association said the Minister of Education is clearly signaling that they are in fact planning to break the law, the private conversation families have in their own homes. A government that seeks that sort of control over our personal lives should be feared and opposed, he added. Donna McCall justified the government's position by pointing to recent Supreme Court ruling upholding the Quebec government's refusal to exempt families from its controversial ethics and religious culture program. That program, which aims to present the spectrum of world religions and lifestyle choices from a neutral stance, is required of all students, including homeschoolers. The last 2 years have seen major battles in Quebec, Ontario, British Columbia, and now Alberta over the increasing normalization of homosexuality in the schools. The government in Canada is now telling parents how they are to raise their own children. Many families feel that this act is not about sexuality or anything else about the gay issue, but rather about the government trying to control what and how we teach our children. Abraham Lincoln is credited with saying that the philosophy of the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. And it's clear to see that the Canadian government is working to control the philosophy in the classroom, and they are using the homosexual agenda to do just that. Why are the children constantly the aim of this agenda? For example, in 2006, in what is likely Canada's first major political party, the Liberal Party of Canada is proposing lowering the age of consent for anal intercourse in their publicly released book of policy resolutions. The Liberal Party policy resolution, attributed to the British Columbia branch of the party, calls for lowering the age of consent for such activity to 14 years of age. Whereas the current law discriminates against unmarried same-sex couples by not permitting unmarried persons under 18 to legally engage in consensual anal intercourse. Be it further resolved that the Liberal Party of Canada urged the federal government of Canada to bring the age of consent for anal intercourse in equal pairing with other forms of sexual activity. I didn't know that was their job. Unfortunately, the pure innocence of children is not held in high esteem anymore in Canada. Children are now being made a prey both physically and spiritually by the homosexual agenda. What about freedom of speech in Canada? How has the homosexual agenda affected this God-given right? Back in 2002, Alberta pastor Stephen Boisillon wrote a letter to the editor in Red Deer Advocate in which Mr. Boisillon expressed his opinion that homosexuality is immoral and dangerous and called into question new gay rights curricula permeating the province's educational system. Stephen Boisillon was ordered by the Alberta Human Rights Commission to desist from expressing his views on homosexuality in any sort of public forum and to pay homosexual activist Dr. Darren Lund $7,000 in damages. In 2009, the Court of the Queen's Bench overturned the Alberta Human Rights Commission hate speech conviction of Reverend Stephen Boisillon. So here we are after 7 years of bearing the stigma of being called by the state an illegal hater, and all the while, the state was the one breaking the law. Reverend Boisillon has finally been acquitted, but not without leaving a clear negative stamp on any citizen who wants to speak out against homosexuality. Or what about a former homosexual prostitute turned religious activist, William Whatcott, who had to argue for his freedom of speech and religion before Canada's top court in October of 2011 in a case viewed as the most significant test of the country's hate laws in years. William Whatcott, whose pro-family proselytizing was prosecuted under the anti-hate provision of the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission in 2002 because he dropped thousands of pamphlets in Saskatoon to denounce increasing acceptance of homosexual marriage and was fined $17,500. The decision was overturned on appeal, and now the case has been brought to the Supreme Court. Then there was a Catholic bishop in Calgary who was the target of complaints filed with the Alberta Human Rights Commission because he issued a pastoral letter urging Catholics to oppose homosexual marriage. Folks, these are just a few examples of how the homosexual agenda has taken the hate speech laws and used to shut out the voice of the people. However, these men have the mindset of Peter and John when they said in the book of Acts, we ought to obey God rather than men. Psalm 9:17 says, the wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. I submit to you that when a nation removes the moral stop signs found in God's word, it will not be long until that nation reaps corruption, havoc, crime, and immorality that leads to ultimate destruction. America, we must learn from example what not to do, and Canada is just the example when it comes to the issue of homosexuality. It is clear that our biblical foundation in this nation is under attack, but not completely lost.